Hi there, good to be here this afternoon. Pleasure to see you all. As Peter said, we're going to talk about the disruption of the world's largest industry, the $6 trillion energy industry. I'm an investor in clean energy technologies as well, and earlier this year I started the first angel-less syndicate for investing in early-stage clean tech companies. So we're going to talk about 5 things in this talk today: innovation in wind power, innovation in solar power, innovation in energy storage, that's the new rising area, what happens beyond oil, and then finally how to take action in a rapidly changing environment like the energy industry today. So let's start with wind power. A lot of us think of wind power as staid, it's existed for hundreds of years, but in fact it's rapidly changing. In the last decade, the amount of wind power deployed around the world has scaled by a staggering 1,000%, a 10x increase in the amount of global wind power deployed in just 11 years, which is not normal for the energy industry. That's been driven by several things. It's driven by policies that have fueled deployment, but those policies would not have been effective if we had not seen this: an exponential decline in the cost of wind power. Grid electricity in the US at the wholesale costs around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. In the 1980s, wind power cost nearly 10 times this, but that has changed dramatically. Now, in last year, the average price of a new wind power deal in the US was less than 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And energy is a fungible commodity. People will buy the source that is cheapest, all else being equal. And so this is a transformation in what we buy and why, a 24x price decline. That's happened because we've learned to build these larger and larger machines. If you make a wind turbine taller, you access winds that blow more rapidly. In addition, the amount of power that a wind turbine can access is equal to the area its blade sweeps through. That's the square of the length. So if you double a wind turbine blade, because you've made advances in material science, you can quadruple the amount of energy that it collects. That's a fundamental advantage economically. And so you can see, as the size of wind turbines has grown in the blue, the cost of wind power has come down in the orange. Now, not only has the cost come down, but something just as important has happened. Wind power and solar are intermittent energy sources. The wind turbines only provide power when the wind is blowing. So historically, wind turbines have had a 25% capacity factor, meaning that they produce about a quarter of the energy that they could if they were blowing at full speed throughout their history. But as we've made these larger wind turbines with more advanced shapes for their blades, that has changed. So now the average is 40%, and in the best sites in the US, they're now blowing at 50% uptime, if you will. And on the horizon, the average will be in the next decade about 50%, and the very best will be 60 or 65%. And now you have a renewable resource that is not just clean, but is also steady and stable, enabling it to provide power to the grid potentially 24/7. Other innovations have brought this too. You heard Brad talk about the Internet of Things, talk about computing. As we've learned to put more sensors on these turbines and integrate the big data coming off of them, we've been able to integrate more power more effectively into the grid. So Xcel Energy, a utility in Colorado, with just new algorithms, new machine learning algorithms, was able to triple the amount of wind power they could deploy in their state, which saved them several $billion and saved consumers that as well. Software is eating energy. Well, here's another way in which software is eating energy. This is a drone. This is an unmanned autonomous vehicle that is a blimp that has a wind turbine inside of it. Why would you do that? Because again, the higher up you can place a wind turbine, the steadier the winds blow and the faster they blow, increasing the amount of power that you can capture. So this device from a company called Altios floats up to half a kilometer up, collects those winds, and then brings down the power via the cables that connect it. Or this is also a drone. This is from a company called Makani. And this drone is completely autonomous, completely computer guided. It tips up, takes off vertically, and then spins loop-de-loops in the air, acting as a wind turbine a kilometer up. Now, if you wanted to access winds a kilometer up, That'd be fantastic, except that building that tower would cost you billions of dollars. But instead, this costs you tens of thousands of dollars because the software that can autonomously guide this drone has eaten the capital of building that tower. And Makani was purchased by Google X, who now hope to bring it to market. So wind power prices are declining and will keep declining. But what's even more exciting is what we've seen happening in solar. So much sunlight hits the planet that less than 0.5% of the Earth's land area would collect, with current efficiency solar panels, enough power to provide all of humanity's energy needs this year, and in fact, out through about 2030. So the issue is not enough energy. There's an abundance of energy. The issue has been cost, because solar panels have been built like silicon wafers. If you can imagine covering an area the size of the Mojave Desert with computer chips, you can see that would be prohibitively expensive, tens of trillions of dollars. But like silicon, like computing, we've seen an exponential decline in the price of solar power over the last several years. In fact, it stretches back. In the 1970s, solar power cost nearly $100 per watt, and now you can buy solar panels at 36 cents a watt. That's a more than 200x price decline over the course of those 40 years or so. And it's not as fast as Moore's law, but nothing else outside of biology and computing drops in price this fast. Trucks don't drop in price this fast. Making buildings doesn't drop in price this fast. And now it's led us to a crossover point where, without subsidies in sunny parts of the world, solar is now the cheapest energy you can buy. In fact, we've had a deal signed this past week, or past 2 weeks, that is the cheapest electricity deal ever signed, and it was solar. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Now, the crossover, of course, is not homogeneous. It's based on how sunny your area is. In Europe, the world's leader in deploying solar, until it was overtaken by China last year, was Germany. You can see Germany is in the green here. That means it does not get a lot of sun. But through sheer political will, the German people led this deployment, and that helped bring prices down for everyone. In the US, in North America, the South and the Southwest are the sunniest places, so that means solar will be cheapest there, and naturally that's where we see it starting. Globally, there's two things that are of interest. One is about 1.3 billion people today don't have electricity. Where do those people live? They live they live near the equator. They live in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, two areas that are quite sunny. So in those areas, that's where solar power will be the cheapest, and that is a fortunate coincidence for us and for the world that it overlaps with the areas of greatest energy poverty. In addition, if we look at the areas where we're going to see the greatest growth in energy consumption over the next 2 decades, that's an area that is also fairly sunny. It's not as sunny as sub-Saharan Africa, but it's far sunnier than Europe, which is where this phenomenon really started. Now, I told you we're going to talk about crossover, unsubsidized prices of solar dropping below anything else. This is a new natural gas power plant in the US. Building one of these, you will price the power from it at about 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So let's talk about prices below that. Unsubsidized in the west of China, the Gobi Desert, this project by Trina Solar, about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. In India, the world's largest solar plant being built in Rajasthan, the Sambar Ultra plant, this is a 4 gigawatt plant. This is the size of 4 large nuclear reactors in its output, being built at 4.6 rupees per kilowatt hour, or about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Below grid price, no subsidies. In the US, these are subsidized prices, but it's still quite a phenomenon. 2 years ago, I made this slide. This is the Macho Springs plant made by First Solar, 5.7 cents. Last year, to update it, when NextEra signed a deal at 4.2 cents. Then about 6 months ago, I had to update it when First Solar sold power to Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway at 3.9 cents. And then about 3 months ago, I had updated again when the city of Palo Alto bought power from a power plant being built outside Los Angeles at 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Half the price of grid electricity in the US. That's the change in just the last 2 years. And there are sunnier places where it's even cheaper. This is the trend in the US over about the last 8 years, about a 4 to 5x reduction in prices, crashing through the grid parity cost in areas that are sunny. In Mexico, power auction earlier this year, 5.1 cents per kilowatt hour was the average bid. The lowest bid, no subsidies, 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour by Spanish developer Enel. But my favorite of these slides actually is this one. In Dubai, a large solar power plant being built, 800 megawatts, being built primarily by a Saudi firm. So I love this picture of sultans with solar panels. And the price for this was a staggering less than 3 cents per kilowatt hour. No subsidies whatsoever, less than half the price of new natural gas or coal. And this was the cheapest price anyone had ever seen for a power sale of any sort of electricity, any sort. But that was recently broken too, because Chile, where we've had about a dozen cases of solar winning purely in economics, just announced the cheapest deal ever seen at 2.91 cents per kilowatt hour. So in multiple places around the world where the sun shines, solar is now the cheapest power you can buy anywhere on the planet. Zero subsidies. So that's a revelation. And driven by that and by policy, we've had an even more enormous uprushing of solar power. I told you that wind power scaled by a factor of 10 in 11 years. Solar makes that look slow because solar has scaled by a factor of more than 100 in 13 years, and it continues to grow. You've been told if you take an exponential trend and put it on a log scale, it looks straight. This is solar on a log scale. This year, new installations of solar power grew 43%. Doubling time is around 2 years. It will slow eventually, but this is an exponential trend in the explosion of solar energy. It's a digitization of energy, if you will. And as scale grows, price comes down. If we look at the price of solar not as a function of time, but as a function of volume, it has this continuous decline in price as volume goes up on a log scale. Prices will keep falling. But what do you do if the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing? There's actually a lot we can do. We can probably hit 70%, 80% of the grid of a country like the US or a continent like Europe from just solar and wind. But if you want to hit the rest of that, you need to be able to store energy for the times that your renewables are not providing it. And so how do we do that? Well, we've had a revelation there too. You all know who this is, right? Tony Stark? Oh, did I give it away? So Elon here is announcing the Tesla Powerwall. So the funny thing about this is Tesla does not make this battery. This is actually a Panasonic battery with a Tesla brand and Tesla sales channel on top of it, which is a very smart thing. Tesla is able to announce this battery not because of a sudden breakthrough, but because of a long-term exponential trend in the price of energy storage. The price of storage has declined on a highly predictable exponential pace. This is on a log scale, and over this 15-year period, we've seen that the amount of energy you can store per unit weight in a lithium-ion battery has roughly tripled, and the cost per unit energy has gone down about 10x in that 15 years, about another 2x in the years since then, about 20x in the last 25 years as the industry has scaled. So we're now at an inflection point for storage because energy storage has just become profitable with no subsidies in specific markets. This is a house in Germany. This is from a German analysis. And what it finds is that this house in Germany, which is not a very sunny place, with a small solar setup and a battery less than half the size of the Powerwall, in the summer months, not only is this cost saving for them, in the summer months, this house could provide 70% of its own electricity. So what happens if you're a utility and your business model is selling electrons to people, and your customers in some months are reducing their consumption by a factor of 4? That's a disruption in the marketplace right there. But the larger market, Tesla took about $1 billion in pre-orders for its batteries in the week after it announced it. Most of them were not of that home scale battery. 90% of it was this utility scale battery being sold to utilities and large corporations. And every other large manufacturer of solar and batteries is getting in this as well. This is Trina Solar. They're the world's largest manufacturer of solar. This is their semi-trailer shipping container size battery, about almost a megawatt hour in this. I've been inside of it. So every manufacturer is getting into this building. And what they're going after as an initial market is what we call energy price arbitrage. At night, electricity is cheap. In the daytime, electricity is expensive. That difference in Southern California, for instance, is about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And guess what? Battery storage is now cheaper than that. So now it's found a market, and as it gets into that market, it will expand in volume, and that will bring the prices down lower. It's a virtuous cycle. Of course, people have made projections about battery prices for quite some time. The orange line here are the projections of the US Energy Information Administration. The other lines are projections of various analysts. These are projections made in 2013. Those analysts guessed that we'd see about a 3x reduction in battery prices over 10 years. They were wrong. What we actually saw was about a 5x reduction in battery prices in 5 years. That's the actual pace of innovation. And the world's experts in this are not accurately predicting how fast the change actually happens. In fact, if we look at the price of solar and we look at the price trends of batteries, they are nearly identical. They both drop in cost about 20% per doubling of scale. And what that means is that batteries are at a point in their evolution like solar was in about 2000, still expensive and poised for enormous price reductions over the next decade, decade and a half. And that will change everything about how we do power. And in fact, it's all of what I've just said has been about lithium-ion batteries, but there are a host, there's a dozen more technologies in the pipe for energy storage, many of which could be even cheaper. Here's one. I suspect that over time we'll see a divergence of batteries. We'll have lithium-ion batteries used for mobile devices because they're light. But for the grid, you don't care if it's light or if it's small. This is a flow battery. Flow batteries are very large, very bulky, 3 times bigger than lithium-ion batteries. But where a lithium-ion battery might last for 1,000 charge cycles, which is fine for a phone, this battery can last for 10,000 charge cycles. And so it makes more sense to deploy for something like a utility where you build for decades of time. So now we're looking at something crazy. If you take these trends and play forward, you start to think technology gets cheaper over time. Now we're using technology to produce energy. Does that mean clean energy will one day be cheaper than dirty energy? And the answer appears to be yes, that we are coupling the historically fluctuating price of energy to the ever-declining cost of technology. And people are starting to wake up to this. Here's a projection. This is the International Energy Agency. This is the world's experts on energy. And this is not what you would call an exponential organization. It's a very, very conservative organization. Let me show you how. These are the IEA's forecasts on solar growth for the last decade or so. And if you read from the bottom, the first blue line at the bottom is their forecast for how fast solar would grow in 2002. The big blue bold line at the top is how fast things actually grew. And you see every year or so they issue a new update and they keep upping the numbers. All right? They have yet to catch up. Now, it does look like that red line, 2014, they've basically caught up to how fast solar is actually growing. So who thinks the IEA has now got it, has now accurately forecast solar? I heard, are you laughing at the International Energy Agency? The world's experts on energy? I see one hand saying maybe they got it. Well, they haven't. They're actually just drawing tangents to the line, and solar has already lifted off of that line. It's now almost to 300 gigawatts deployed around the world. So this is the agency that I'm about to show you their forecasts, because they're quite conservative, yet even they, the IEA, now says solar will be the #1 source of electricity by mid-century, and solar prices will be unbeatable. That's when the agency that's been wrong, conservative in their forecast every single year. Well, here's UBS, a large financial services firm, large bank. They released a report last year saying renewables are now deflationary to energy prices. That was crazy talk 3 or 4 years ago. Here's Fraunhofer ISC, a German think tank. They look at the future of energy prices. The red dashed line is current grid prices. They see in Southern Europe prices 1/3 those of the grid for solar. Well, my favorite of these, AllianceBernstein, is a private equity firm, not environmentalists by any means. They follow the money. So here's a graph that they sent out in a report last year. The bottom of this is the price of Henry Hub oil, the price of coal, the price of liquefied natural gas. And then at the far right, that gray line, I think somebody's kid took a crayon and scrawled across the page or something, right? Is that what happened? That's the price of solar. This is a very long-term graph. This is a more than 60-year graph. But when you zoom back, that is the disruption happening in the marketplace. And if we put the price of energy storage on there, it would look quite similar. And that starts to look like the price performance gains and the disruption caused to a company like Kodak, who had the ultimate business model and yet were disrupted by this rapidly evolving technology that was first a toy, first uneconomical, and then suddenly was the best technology available. And in fact, we've just passed a major tipping point. Last year, in terms of new electricity generating capacity, there was more clean electricity capacity built in the world than dirty. And we will probably never have that change. We are now at a point where we'll never look back and build more coal or gas than we're building solar or wind at any point again. Now that's all electricity. We could have cheap, abundant electricity, but that's not the only way we use energy, of course. We use an awful lot of this stuff. The world's most valuable commodity, about a third of our energy use is oil. So what's the future of that commodity and how do we get ourselves off of it? This is a quote from Sheikh Yamani. He was the Saudi oil minister during the oil crisis of the 70s. The Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stone. What's he saying there? He is saying it was superseded. The Bronze Age came. He is warning his fellow princes that the world is going to invent a replacement for oil, and they had better be prepared for that transition. The world is going to invent bronze to oil's stone, and that's what's happening. Now, oil is this incredible commodity because it has this sharp fluctuations in price, right? In the last few years, we've seen prices of $150 a barrel down to $35 a barrel. All of that fluctuation has been caused by about a 2 million barrel a day imbalance. About 2 million barrels too much, 2 million barrels too little. That's about a 2% shift in the supply-demand imbalance. Now, because oil is so sensitive to these small shifts, it basically cannot predict the short-term price of oil. This is the price of oil cratering, and those lines going off to the right are consensus forecasts for the price of oil. Forecasting is hard. Let me not be too hard on these folks. You cannot predict the short-term price of oil. If you could, you'd be a billionaire. It just doesn't really work. But we may be able to predict the long-term price of oil. And I will tell you, the long-term price of oil is going to be cheap because our demand for it is going to drop. Now, I didn't believe that just a few years ago, but these things, electric vehicles, have surged in a way that I did not think possible. But now when you play out the ramifications, it means a dramatic shift for that multi-trillion-dollar commodity. Electric vehicles are a tiny fraction of the world's transportation. There's 1 billion cars on the road around the world. Only 1 million of them are electric. So 1/10 of 1%. Right? But electric vehicles are growing at 60% annually. And in the long run, it's a growth rate and not current numbers that determine the outcome. And this does not yet show signs of slowing. It must eventually. But as of now, in the first half of 2016, 57% growth. All right? So who saw this coming? The Tesla Model 3, $35,000 car with a 350-kilometer range. That is a game changer because the median price of a new car in the US is a Toyota Camry at $33,000. This is a luxury vehicle that competes in price with a commodity vehicle and happens to also be electric. Now, if we look at what did the US Energy Information Agency think would happen to electric vehicles, if you can't see the bottom line, the red line at the bottom is how many electric vehicles with a 200-mile range did EIA expect to have on the roads total? And by 2040, they expected to have 10,000 vehicles on the road that were electric and had a 200-mile range. Right? How many Model 3s did Tesla sell in the first 3 days? about 300,000. So what we're really looking at is one manufacturer selling each year 50 times the number of vehicles that EIA thought we would have in total by 2040, and doing so in the next 5 years. This is a transformation. Bet on the innovators and not the forecasters. That's what we see here. And so then we enter this virtuous cycle, because more volume means lower price. So batteries are the most expensive thing in an electric vehicle. As we sell more EVs, the demand for batteries goes up. As the demand for batteries goes up, the price of batteries goes down, which means the price of EVs goes down, which means we sell more EVs, which means the price of batteries goes down. And as we enter that virtuous cycle, they become potentially unbeatable on price. So here's the more radical thing I'm going to say. Electric vehicles will be the cheapest vehicles to own and the cheapest vehicles to drive. And this is why. Because what you're looking at here, this is the entire engine and drivetrain of an electric vehicle. It has 90% fewer moving parts than an internal combustion vehicle. That means its maintenance cost is incredibly low, but it also means that in the long run, at similar scale, its manufacturing price will be far lower than the manufacturing price of a more complex, more moving parts internal combustion vehicle. In fact, if we apply that learning curve model, how much does the price of an electric vehicle drop for every doubling in scale? And we look at the price of EVs compared to the price of other vehicles. The Toyota Camry is the blue line. The green line is the price of the cheapest new car you can buy in the US today, which is a 2-seater smart car. And we take that luxury Tesla Model 3 and we say, how does the price of something like that change over time? At half the current growth rate, it will be cheaper than a smart car by 2030. And so who the heck is going to buy an internal combustion vehicle then? That, in turn, starts to look like a disruption of the oil industry, because if electric vehicles keep growing at their current pace, within 8 years, they'll be taking 2 million barrels of oil demand off the market each day, about the same amount as has caused that vicious swing in oil prices. And even if they slow, it could be 10 years from now instead of 8 years from now. So again, I can't tell you what the short-term price of oil is going to be, but I can make a strong guess that the long-term price of oil is cheap, because oil producers will be selling into a shrinking market rather than a growing market. And two other trends. Brad Templeton tomorrow is going to talk about transportation. So two other trends that he'll talk about amplify this switch to electric vehicles. One is buying rides instead of buying cars. Because if we buy rides, we care about what is the cost per mile driven. And the cost per mile driven in an electric vehicle is already at parity with or cheaper than the cost per mile of an internal combustion vehicle, because the energy is cheaper and the maintenance is cheaper. And if the cost of electric vehicles drops, within a decade, we'll see where if you call an Uber, the electric one will cost half the price of the internal combustion one. So then who is going to call the dirty, smelly, more expensive one rather than a sleek, clean, cheaper one? And automation, the other trend, will take care of the largest blocker people have for electric vehicles, which is range anxiety. Ranges are already getting quite long, but if the vehicle goes and charges itself, then you just don't have to worry. Okay, so with all of that said, how do you take action in this world? Well, there's a Chinese proverb that crisis is danger plus opportunity. And this is a crisis. We are in danger. I haven't mentioned this yet, but we live with the specter of climate change. 2014 was the hottest year ever recorded on Earth. 2015 blew that away, and 2016 looks poised to blow that away as well. We have a real problem we have to address. January 1st, 2016, it was above freezing at the North Pole. That's a clear way to think about what's happening with climate change. And we have this very large economic challenge, which is the market value of the fossil fuels that we can't burn, if we want to stay under 2 degrees Celsius, is about $22 trillion. So there's a very real disincentive to keep that in the ground, and there's a very real risk of a market bubble if those assets are eventually written off. So there is quite a bit of danger to the planet, to investors, to companies, and to nations up ahead. But there's also huge opportunity. Opportunity to have cheaper energy that can help more people. Opportunities to accelerate economic growth. So how do we tap into those? Well, what accelerated the deployment of rooftop solar in the US? Yell out any answer that comes to you. Financing, Solar City. All right, this is a smart crowd. So subsidies, all of the above, right? I talk about three things. One, technology. The technology got better and better and cheaper. Couldn't have happened without that. Two, policy. Subsidies, net metering, which lets you sell your excess electricity back to the grid. It couldn't have happened without that. But three, these guys, Solar City, right? And Solar City is not a technology company. Until recently, they have never manufactured solar panels. Solar City is a finance company. What Solar City did was bring a business model to this space. They said, look, people don't have the money in their pocket to be able to afford solar. Instead of going into this field and becoming another solar manufacturer, why don't we just solve that problem? We will offer to lease it to them, finance it to them. We know that it will save the homeowner money, and we will skim some money off the top. So many of you are business people. It does not take a technical innovation to play in this field. Often what it takes is a business model innovation to find a gap between the real value and what's being experienced by customers. So this is a company I invested in that does the same thing for efficiency, more or less. And it's when we see that intersection of policy change, technology change, and business model change all happening, that's when this rapid change in a marketplace occurs. And in fact, there's often a virtuous cycle between them. A policy shift can scale a technology, which brings down its cost, which opens up new business frontiers, which drives more policy change, and so on. And what's needed there is someone to say, I'm going to take a chance on that. I'm going to start that virtuous cycle spinning. So you can picture Elon Musk's face in that. And while most of those entrepreneurs will fail, to be honest, some of them will tap into multi-billion-dollar opportunities as they set that wheel spinning and ride that going forward. So in my mind, the future is bright and the opportunities are huge. And thank you very much.